Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. We're tackling financial forecasting today, specifically how something called transformers might be able to actually predict how bumpy the market's going to be.
Yeah, think about it like, will it be smooth sailing for a stock, or are we going to have to buckle up for a wild ride?
I like that.
That's what we're talking about when we talk about forecasting stock realized volatility.
Huh?
Basically, it's how much a stock's price jumps up and down in a certain amount of time.
Okay, so it's less about if a stock will go up or down and more about like how crazy the ride will be.
Exactly.
Gotcha. And I'm guessing these transformer models are what some people are saying will be able to predict that volatility,
Well,
right?
got it. You've been digging into some research, haven't you? Well, you know me, always got to look at the data, and we've got a juicy one today. Can transformers transform financial forecasting?
Straight to the point.
Right. No beating around the bush with this one.
And it's coming from a global perspective published in China Finance Review International.
Oh, interesting. Who are the authors on this one?
The authors are Hugo Gabarro-Sato and Amir Moradi.
Okay, and I gotta say, this paper is pretty dense. Luckily, that's why you're here.
Well, I'll do my best to unpack it. We'll break it down together.
Perfect, because if I'm being honest, when I hear Transformers, I'm thinking like Optimus Prime, not market trends.
Yeah, I get it. It's not exactly intuitive.
So for those of us who aren't like AI experts, what are Transformers in this context?
So imagine you're reading a sentence, but you can only look at one word at a time, totally missing the connections between them.
Right. That would make things pretty hard to understand.
You'd miss the context. Well, that's how a lot of older models work. But transformers, they look at all the words in a sentence at the same time, so they can grasp all those relationships and nuances.
Wow, so it's like those chess masters who can like see 10 moves ahead, except instead of chess pieces, it's like market data, right?
That's a great way to put it. And in the world of finance, that's huge. Financial data is all interconnected, right? So a model that can actually understand those connections, well, it could have a real advantage.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And this paper, it's not just looking at any transformers, right? They're diving into something called second generation transformer models, is that right?
Exactly, specifically TFT, Informer, Autoformer, and Patch TST.
And why those specific ones? What makes them so special?
Well, previous research found that those first-generation transformer models, well, they weren't that great at forecasting tasks. So these second-generation models, they're the newer kids on the block, the ones that are supposed to be even better at spotting those market patterns.
Oh, okay. So they're hoping these second gen models will be the key. That's super interesting. But you know me, I always like to understand the context. Were there any other important studies that kind of set the stage for this research?
Actually, yeah, there was. This paper we're looking at today, it actually directly challenges another study that was super skeptical of using transformers for, well, anything in finance, really. Almost like they were throwing down a gauntlet.
Oh, some academic drama. Okay, so this paper's challenging some previous research that wasn't too keen on transformers. I'm even more interested now.
Right. Like, a good debate always gets things going. But they didn't just challenge it with words. They really put these models through the ringer, using a ton of real-world stock data.
Okay, so hard data to back up their claims.
Yeah, and not just any data. We're talking 80 different stocks, all big players in the S&P 500.
The S&P 500, so a good representation of the market overall.
Exactly. And get this, they covered a period from 2007 to 2021.
Whoa, that includes the 2008 crisis and the COVID crash.
Exactly. They wanted to see how these models would handle those super chaotic times.
Makes their findings much more relevant, testing those models against those wild periods in market history. So they've got their transformers, their data, but how exactly did they measure how well they actually worked? I'm guessing it's not as simple as just like, yep, that one's good.
You're right, you need some solid metrics.
Right. Gotta quantify it somehow.
And they did. They used what's called forecast horizons. Basically, they tested the model's ability to predict volatility 1 day ahead, 1 week ahead, and 2 weeks ahead.
Oh, that's clever because not everyone has the same investment time frame, right?
Precisely. Yeah, a day trader is going to be glued to those daily swings, while a long-term investor, they're thinking bigger picture.
Exactly. Okay, so they've got their different time frames set up. How do they actually measure which models were the most accurate? I've heard these things called error metrics. Is that what they use?
You got it. Error metrics basically measure how far off a model's prediction was from what actually happened.
So if I'm understanding this right, the lower the score on those error metrics, the better the model did at predicting the actual volatility.
Got it. Lower score equals better prediction.
Makes sense. All right, so drum roll, please. Which models came out on top?
Well, when it came to those short-term forecasts, like just one day ahead, Autoformer really knocked it out of the park.
Autoformer, that's one of the transformer models, right?
Yep, one of the second-generation ones we've been talking about. It was especially good when there wasn't much historical data to go on.
Which, let's be real, happens all the time, right? Like with new companies just hitting the market.
All the time. And that's where Autoformer shined. It's like a fast learner, which is super valuable in a market that moves as quickly as ours.
So it can adapt on the fly, which would be great for someone like me who likes to check out those new stocks.
Exactly. Now, here's something interesting. Remember that HAR model we talked about?
The simpler one that's often used as a benchmark. Yeah, remember it came up in a few other deep dives, I think.
Well, it actually held its own against the fancier transformers, even outperforming some of them in certain scenarios,
Yeah.
especially during those chaotic periods like the COVID crash.
Wow, so even with all these complex new models, sometimes simple is best. You really never know what's going to happen in the market.
You got that right. It's a good reminder that there's not always a one-size-fits-all solution.
For sure. Okay, so for those super short-term predictions, it's kind of a mixed bag. But what about when we're looking further out, like a week or two ahead? What happened then? Did any of the models really stand out?
Yeah, when we stretch the forecast horizon to a week or two, that's when Patch TST really took the lead, especially when it came to avoiding those huge forecasting errors, the ones that could really take investors by surprise.
Oh, yeah, the kind that make your stomach drop.
Exactly. So if you're someone who really wants to protect themselves from those huge unexpected market swings, Patch TST might be something you'd want to look into.
It's like the buckle up model.
I like it. What were the other models doing a week or two out? Was Patch TST just totally dominating?
Patch TST definitely had an edge there. But Informer, that was another strong contender. It was consistently strong across both the 1 week and 2 week horizons.
Why is that? What makes Informer so good at those longer time frames?
It's really good at spotting those long-range patterns in the data. It's kind of like it has a longer attention span.
Fascinating. So, to summarize, if you really want to try and avoid those massive unexpected swings, Patch TST might be the way to go. But if you're looking for something that's generally strong across different time frames, Informer might be a solid choice. Exactly. It all comes back to what's important to you as an investor. Your risk tolerance, your goals, your overall strategy.
Right, because a strategy that relies on those quick, short-term trades is going to look very different from one that's more about the long game.
100%. And what I really appreciated about this paper, they didn't just stop at testing the models once and calling it a day. They put them through these rigorous robustness tests to see how they hold up under pressure.
Yeah, because a model that only works in a perfect world, that doesn't do us much good, right? So
Yeah.
tell me more about these robustness tests. What did they do exactly?
Well, one of the things they did was play around with the amount of training data.
Training data, that's all that historical stock information. They feed the models so they can actually learn, right?
Right. So by changing the amount of training data, they were able to see how well these models could perform when they only had access to limited historical data, which is often the case in the real world, right? You don't always have decades of data to work with, especially with things changing so fast these days.
Makes sense. It's like testing if they can think on their feet a little bit. Okay, so they tested for limited data. What else did those robustness tests reveal? Anything particularly surprising?
Well, they also looked at how much computational power each model needed. Because you could have the most accurate model in the world, but if it takes a supercomputer to run it, well, that's not really practical for most people.
My laptop can barely handle my music library, let alone some crazy AI model. So which models were the most efficient? Were there any surprises there?
Actually, yeah. The HAR model, that simple one we talked about, that was the easiest on the computing power. Not really surprising given how simple it is, but still important.
Right, because efficiency matters too. What about the others?
Patch TST, that was right up there too.
Really? Even though it's more complex? Huh, interesting.
It is. It seems like it's able to do all that analysis without needing a ton of computing power.
So it's kind of like, yeah, it's working hard, but it's working smart too.
Exactly. Now, I know we've thrown a lot of information at you today. You've got all these different models, different time frames, error metrics. What's the big takeaway for you? What are you thinking?
Well, I mean, it's exciting, but I'm also trying to be realistic, It's just one research paper, and like you said, this is all still pretty new.
I hear you. It's definitely cutting-edge stuff, and while this research is really promising, more research is always needed to really see how these second-generation transformers will perform in the long run.
Makes sense. So no crystal ball just yet, but definitely something to keep an eye on, especially if these models can actually help people make better decisions, manage their risk better.
Exactly. Imagine if you could anticipate those huge market swings and adjust your strategy accordingly.
Right. That would be
That would
incredible.
change the game.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this field so exciting. There's always something new to learn, something new to explore.
Oh, for sure. It's a never-ending puzzle. This has been a fascinating deep dive. I'm always amazed by how much work goes into understanding the market.
Well, it is a constantly moving target,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Always something new to figure out, new models to develop. It'll be really interesting to see what they come up with next. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. As always, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And until next time, happy forecasting, everyone.